We, the jury, returned the unanimous verdict as follows: that the defendant, Rae Carruth, is guilty of discharging a firearm into occupied property, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder of Sharika Adams.
Rae Carruth, the former Carolina Panthers wide receiver, hired 3 of his friends to kill his pregnant ex-girlfriend and unborn son. That's what the jury just decided. But why did Rae do it? What was his motive? Well, the prosecution proposed some reasons at the 2001 trial. They said that Rae didn't want to have a child, so he had Sharika shot in the stomach. This was the obvious motive that one would surmise from a basic accounting of the facts. But you may be surprised to learn that Rae's lawyer, David Rudolph, actually put forward a pretty strong case that Rae wanted the baby and was looking forward to fathering the child. We will get to that soon, but first we have the prosecution's evidence. Rae Carruth wanted Sharika to get an abortion when he found out she was pregnant. That actually isn't in dispute in this case. The defense agrees with that point. That fact probably didn't help Rae with a North Carolina jury from the turn of the millennium, but one would still need some evidence to prove that abortion was Rae's motive for murder. Van Brett Watkins, the man Rae hired to kill Sharika and his unborn son, claimed that initially Rae just wanted a miscarriage to be induced in Sharika by beating her up. Sharika being shot and dying was apparently just a byproduct of not being able to find a small caliber gun in time. The defense countered this motive by putting forward evidence that Rae actually did want a child. Jonathan Gould, a psychologist brought in to analyze Rae's parenting, testified that he heard from lots of people in Rae's life that Rae was looking forward to the baby being born and that Rae had agreed to co-parent the child with Sharika. They would see other people romantically, but they would still co-parent the child. The defense's investigator, Ron Jarrett, claimed that Rae had even bought baby furniture and went to parenting classes in anticipation of the birth. Those are certainly good facts for Carruth, but there's more. Since Rae was charged with the attempted murder of a child, the defense had free rein to present character evidence that he had a love of children. A small army of people from Rae's life testified that he was good with children and that he liked kids. Here is just one of those many accounts. Starlita Walker met Rae at the barber's shop when she was getting her haircut with her son Jacoby.
Rae just began to talk to Kobe, and he asked if, while I was getting my haircut, Rae asked if Jacoby could go with him to get some pizza right down the block, and I told him it was okay.
What pizza place did they go to?
Fuel Pizza is on Central Avenue. It's in the same block as the barbershop. It took a while for them to come back, so after I got my haircut, I stuck my head out the door to see if they were coming, and when I looked out, they were in front of the pizza shop, kind of bent down. It looked like they were looking for something. But then I could hear my son screaming, "On your march, get set, go." And they took off running towards me, towards the shop. And I guess they were preparing to race when I looked out the door.
Do you remember who won the race?
Jacoby.
Rae then recruited Jacoby to join the 5-7's T-ball team that he was coaching, and also brought him along to Panthers events. The jury were instructed that if Rae is somebody who possesses the character trait of a love of children, that in turn makes it less likely that he would commit a crime that would result in the injury of a child. Now that's all well and good. Maybe Rae was good with kids and did want a child, but Rae already had a son. While he was at the University of Colorado, his high school sweetheart from back in Sacramento, Michelle Wright, gave birth to Rae Carruth Jr. Rae wasn't there for the birth and would not visit him very often. In fact, Rae didn't even get his son presents for his birthday. Rae's mother provided those. To be fair, Rae had tried to be there when Junior was born. He was in Sacramento just days before, but had to go back to Colorado for football camp. Rae did, however, manage to make time to experience the birth telephonically. It is also true that Rae didn't visit his son as much as he should have, but he had a reason, and it had nothing to do with the child. According to Rae's cousin, Michelle didn't let Rae have any time alone with his son, and she would constantly be trying to get back together with him. Rae resorted to bringing along third parties to the visits so Michelle wouldn't come on to him. Rae should have been more present in his son's life, but this in no way proves that he didn't want to have another child with a different woman. It's also worth noting that while Rae wasn't there physically for his son, he did provide for the kid, paying $5,000 a month in child support. Quite a substantial sum for Sacramento in the late 90s. But the experience that Rae has with child support is actually the prosecution's second proposed motive. Rae wanted to kill his and Sharika's baby because he didn't want to pay any more child support. The driver of the getaway car, Michael Kennedy, said that Rae told him that he was afraid Sharika would juice him for money. Kennedy also claimed that Sharika set him up. She stopped taking birth control without informing Rae. Rae wasn't happy with the level of child support he was paying in California. The amount had been initially dictated by a judge who was handling the case. Rae and Michelle then made the amount permanent, and at a later point, Michelle actually agreed to decrease the sum in exchange for Rae visiting more often. Rae agreed to the decrease, but he didn't hold up his end of the bargain. Rae also tried to weasel out of paying child support to Sharika by using a phony paternity test. Or at least that's the case according to Rae's ex-girlfriend, Amber Turner. Now, there is nothing funny about this trial, but if there were a funny part, this would probably be it.
Okay, he would talk about fixing the blood tests, about how he, could take it more than once to postpone having to pay any support. Rae told me that his agent had set up with him a deal with the FBI where he could pay them $50,000 to fix the blood test so that they would come out negative, that they were not his. And the other scenario was that his brother Wyatt, his half-brother in Sacramento, was going to go with him, so that apparently you take a picture when you take a blood test along with the blood, and the picture was going to be of Rae, but the blood was going to come from his brother Wyatt.
So did you mention the FBI?
Yes.
Yeah.
Putting the FBI aside, Rae's teammate, Mushin Muhammad, recommended Rae get a paternity test, but that test turned out not to be necessary due to the mother being murdered. To be fair, there is nothing wrong with planning a paternity test, and for what it's worth, Rae never denied the child was his. He showed pictures of his newborn son to police officers at the hospital after an emergency C-section was performed on Sharika. The defense didn't dispute that Rae wasn't happy with the child support arrangement in California, but they once again claimed that Rae's issues had nothing to do with his son. Rae's friend and co-worker Hannibal Navies and his cousin Tiffany Adams both said that Rae complained about the child support since he didn't think the money was actually going to his son. The mother, Michelle Wright, lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with her own mother, so Rae Jr. didn't even have his own room and slept in a bed with his mom. Rae believed that at $5,000 a month, Michelle should have rented her own apartment where everybody could have their own room. Overall, that seems to be quite a reasonable complaint. And even though Rae wasn't happy with the situation, he always paid and was even ahead of time on some of the child support payments. It's also not like Rae was in the type of financial difficulties one would expect for someone to resort to murder. Rae was in the third year of a 4-year contract with the Carolina Panthers. In 1999, he would have made $575,000, and in 2000, it would have been $718,000. After that, he would have been an unrestricted free agent and would have been able to sell his services to the highest bidder. Even if no other teams were interested, Mark Herney, the then head of football operations at the Panthers, testified that before the murder charges, they'd planned to keep Rae. At the time, they were using a throw-heavy offense that required many wide receivers, so Rae was in quite a secure position with respect to future income. The defense also brought in a special agent from the IRS to analyze Rae's finances. He found that at the time of the murder, Rae had a net worth of $368,000 and monthly expenses of $9,500. Half of that was child support payments to California. Rae was not under any financial strain. Rae was also not very stringent with money. He funded a gospel concert in his mother's honor and paid for his cousin's university education. He also bought a car for his girlfriend Amber Turner when he was first drafted and donated money to a friend's African ballet school in Chicago. Rae also wasn't tight with money with Sharika. Rae's accountant testified that Rae gave Sharika $1,260 and he helped out whenever she needed anything. Rae didn't kill Sharika to avoid paying child support. So maybe Rae's problem wasn't with raising or paying for his son. Maybe he just didn't want Sharika in the picture. This would line up with his claimed experience with his son in California. Rae told people that the problem there was that the mother, Michelle Wright, was trying to use his visits with Rae Jr. as an opportunity to get back together with him. Maybe he didn't want Sharika doing the same thing. At least for the California situation, he only had to put up with it on visits. Sharika would have lived in the same city as him. Even before the child was born, Sharika was tracking Rae down at restaurants and calling him rather often. All of this would have been solved if Sharika died and Rae could raise his son on his own. An interesting theory, but the prosecution didn't really pursue this motive as it contradicted Watkins and Kennedy's testimonies. Also, there was literally nobody that ever heard Rae complain about Sharika or even say anything bad at all about her. So, it seems that Sharika did not bother Rae in the same way that Michelle Wright did. Those are the main three potential motives. Rae didn't want to raise the child, or pay child support, or deal with Sharika. Quite honestly, the prosecution doesn't have a slam dunk argument on any of those. The defense put up a pretty good case, and at least in terms of quantity of evidence, the defense certainly outdid the prosecution. They called lots of character witnesses and friends of Rae's who contradicted the prosecution's motive theories. Luckily for the prosecution, determining a motive isn't required to find Rae guilty. The jury can convict Rae without having any idea why he did it. Having said that, the inability to definitively prove a motive is a sizable hole in the prosecution's case. A collateral benefit of calling lots of Rae's friends, family, and co-workers to contradict the suggested motives was that they all got to say nice things about Rae and praise his character. At least 9 witnesses testified that Rae was a non-violent person and they had never seen him be violent. Many said that they had never even seen him raise his voice. Jonathan Gould was a psychologist hired for Rae's custody case. He had a responsibility to produce an unbiased account of Rae's interactions with people over time. After talking to those close to Rae and hearing only positive things, he did his due diligence and tried to find any negative interactions.
What I did was to ask each person who I interviewed if they knew of anybody else who I could interview who had had a negative run-in with Mr. Carruth. I was interested in looking for anybody who would have experienced him as argumentative, anybody who would have had a fight with him, anybody who would have seen him as a poor competitor. I was looking for information that could help me see Mr. Carruth in a more negative light, and I asked this of each person. There are 2 reasons why I asked that question. The first is that it was related to the questions that are on the questionnaire. I did not want to be limited to the people who I initially thought would be useful to talk to, because very often in doing what are called these collateral interviews, you find out that these individuals know of somebody else who knows of somebody else who's had an experience, and you follow that trail. The other reason was that because of my experience in the visitation component, I had been hearing resoundingly positive things about Mr. Carruth, and I really wanted to make a concerted effort to, on his home turf in Sacramento, to find people who might not have felt as positively about him or his behavior. I modified question 3. You have read question 3. It is, did you ever hear about any physical fights that Rae was involved in? During my interviews, I actually changed that. I asked the question in this way: would it surprise you to know that I have found information to indicate that Mr. Carruth has been involved in physical fights? I changed it that way because I wanted to be somewhat leading.
And what was the result of Gould's interviews?
The general theme from individuals interviewed who knew him in high school and college, as well as in his current life, indicated that he had a calm approach to stress situations, that he focused on working things through talking. He was described as even-tempered, to listening to other positions and then making up his mind, generally laid back. I mean, those were the adjectives that were, or descriptions that were generally used in describing Mr. Carruth.
The defense put forward a pretty strong positive case that Rae was not a violent person. But this was risky. By doing this, the defense opened the door to the prosecution presenting evidence disproving that Rae was a pacifist. With this being a nationally televised trial, one would assume that anyone who had had a bad experience with Rae would come forward. Well, the prosecution only found one person. Donald Kim lives in the same apartment building as Rae in Charlotte. He described an occasion when a friend staying at Rae's apartment was blocking his garage with their car. So Kim went to Rae's apartment and Rae lunged at Kim and wrestled him in the hallway. A clear display of Rae's aggressive tendencies. But there were a couple of problems with the story. Kim claimed he reported the attack to the police, but there was no police report. Also, Kim was uninjured, which certainly undermined the alleged aggressiveness of the fight. Rae's cousin, whose car it was that was blocking in Mr. Kim's garage, told the story a little differently. She claimed that Kim came to Rae's door and started shouting at him. Kim's wife was pregnant and he was worried that if her water broke, they would not make it to hospital in time due to his car being blocked in. In the course of this shouting, Kim walked into Rae's foyer, so Rae pushed him out of his apartment by the lapels. The two men then peacefully resolved the dispute. Even if what actually happened was closer to Donald Kim's story, the fact that the only physical altercation the prosecution could ever find Rae having wasn't really that bad speaks to the fact that violence was not an impulse of his. This contrasts heavily with the gunman and driver assassins. Van Brett Watkins and Michael Kennedy's histories were laid out in the previous part, and killing Sharika certainly fits with their records. For Rae though, it is hard to believe that as a generally diplomatic person with no criminal history, he would choose to murder his ex-girlfriend. Why believe Kennedy and Watkins, who are avoiding additional jail time and capital punishment by blaming Rae, rather than just believing Rae himself that he had nothing to do with the killing of Sharika? The prosecution really needs another witness. That's where Candace Smith comes in. She was one of the women that Rae was seeing at the time of the murder. On the day of the shooting, Rae called her and asked to borrow her car. After she refused, Rae called Michael Kennedy and he provided the vehicle. Rae wasn't finished with Candace though. He tried to use her as an alibi by setting up a date in the early hours of the morning of November 16th. She waited at the Waffle House for a while, then called Rae and found out that he was at the hospital where Sharika had been rushed to. Candace went to the hospital and Rae told her some things there.
After the doctors left, he came out and described, I guess, what the doctors had told the family. And he asked me if it was possible that she would set up infection and if she would be a vegetable or complications to her dying. And then he later stated that he wished that she would die.
Then, later at the hospital,
And that's when I asked him what really happened. I asked him, did he have anything to do with it? He went into like a deep trance and he didn't even look at me. And he said that he had been trying to be nice to her and go to doctor's appointments and give her money and keep her happy. And that all he was concerned about right now was if his son would be okay, and that she was sleeping with a lot of people and he wasn't even sure if the child would be his, and that he had been getting money out of the bank a little bit at a time so it wouldn't look suspicious to give to the guys. And he said he watched the guy, well, he hit his brakes in his car to slow her car down, and he saw the guys pull up and shoot into her car. And I asked him, what did he do? And he said, I just drove off and went to Hannibal's house. Well, he said that, he brought up that his mother would be disappointed and that about child support, and that his first son's mother didn't do what she was supposed to do with the money, and he couldn't afford to pay for another child at the time, and that his mother said that he'd always end up in jail. And he said that if he had to go to jail, that he was scared of guys raping him or something, and he'd have to wear a butt plug, as those were his exact words. And that if he had to go to jail, he'd commit suicide, so I might as well just get my black dress ready. Well, he said, I can't get in trouble, can I? And because I didn't actually pull the trigger. He said that the police could check his clothes in his car and they wouldn't find any gunpowder. And he asked me would I ever tell on him, and I told him no.
the defense can say that Kennedy and Watkins are blaming Rae to downplay their own involvement in the murder. But Candace has nothing to gain from testifying. It's not like she's looking for publicity either. She required that the TV cameras not film her while she was testifying. She is a neutral third party that claims that Rae confessed to her. How is David Rudolph going to get Rae out of this mess? Well, maybe Candace isn't as neutral as she seems. She testified that she didn't know Watkins, but a Red Lobster waitress, Alice Alexander, testified that Candace, Watkins, and 4 other people had dinner together at least 7 times. She further claimed that she saw Watkins and Candace talking in clubs and that they seemed to be friendly. Candace also said that she only met Kennedy once or twice, and those occasions were just at Rae's house when Kennedy would come over because he was Rae's friend. However, when speaking to the police, Kennedy referred to Candace as Candy, her adult entertainment name. Rae always referred to her as Candace, so Kennedy must have known her from her place of work and picked up the stage name. Maybe they knew each other more than they let on. Okay, so perhaps Candace downplayed her links to the killers, or maybe she just genuinely forgot. How is this at all connected to Rae confessing at the hospital? What motive would Candace have to lie to the police about that? Well, maybe Candace is a suspect in Sharika's death. She has an undeniable motive. Candace hated Sharika. A short while before the murders, Candace went to a Master P concert with her boyfriend Charles Shackelford. Sharika was also there. Shackelford and Sharika were friends, so Charles had a standard conversation with her. When Candace saw this, she told him not to talk to that bitch, and a shouting match ensued, with Candace, on balance, doing more of the screaming. Shackelford thought that Candace hated Sharika because she broke Candace and Rae apart. It is true that after Sharika became pregnant, Rae spent less time with Candace. Also, there was a previous occasion when the 2 ladies had a dispute. Rae was on a date with Candace and Sharika tracked him down and asked to talk to him outside of the restaurant. When Rae wasn't back soon enough, Candace went outside too and a shouting match started. Candace also had a possessive and violent side. On one occasion, when Rae, Hannibal Navies, and Hannibal's then girlfriend were hanging out at Rae's house, Candace showed up because she thought Rae had another woman over. Rae defused the situation, but then Candace came back with a box cutter. Candace described this as a funny, sort of laughing, joking affair, but Hannibal said it was anything but. He remembers Rae telling him that if he wasn't back in the house in 5 to 10 minutes, then Hannibal should go check on him. And when Hannibal went outside, it was not a funny situation at all. Hannibal hypothesized that this event was a key reason why Rae stopped seeing Candace. The phone records also show that Candace received some calls from the jail where Watkins, Kennedy, and Rae were held. She claimed not to remember who she got the calls from. Add to that she is testifying under an arrangement of conditional immunity, so she could not be charged for concealing anything from the police. Why would the prosecutors not give her full immunity? Were they not certain that Candace wasn't involved in Sharika's death? Did Candace hire her friends Watkins and Kennedy to knock off her romantic competition? Realistically, no. One can point at a few discrete facts and put together a large conspiracy, but there is really no positive evidence that Candace had any involvement in Sharika's death. There are no records of Sharika calling Watkins or Kennedy to set anything up, and literally nobody testified that she was involved in any way. The kind of thinking that would lead one to believe that Candace is responsible, if applied equally to Rae, would have him be found guilty 100 times over. There is certainly enough evidence for Rae to be tried for murder. There is almost nothing connecting Candace to the plot. This idea that Candace had Sharika assassinated also doesn't fit with her actions after the event. After Rae confessed to Candace at the hospital, she stopped calling Rae completely, something she did rather often before that night. Candace said that after Rae told her he was a murderer, she wanted nothing to do with him. The defense tried to attribute the termination of any contact between Rae and Candace as being due to her family advising her not to have anything to do with the case because of the media attention. That was actually the reason that Candace gave herself when she spoke to Rae's investigator, Ron Jarrett. At that time, Candace was still more on Rae's side than the prosecution's. When the police initially spoke to her the day after the murder, she didn't mention Rae's confession, and when the police wanted to follow up, she refused to answer the door. Candace gave her second statement to Rae's investigator. There, she again didn't mention any confession. Only later did she talk to the police again, and after having a lawyer brought in and being granted conditional immunity, she told them the full account. She did, however, tell the full story about the confession to her boyfriend Charles Shackelford the day after the murder. Shackelford is undeniably an unbiased third party. His testimony, particularly his cross-examination by David Rudolph, didn't make Candace look like an honest or good person at all, but he did back up the key fact that Candace told him Rae confessed to her a couple of hours after the shooting. There is honestly no good reason for Candace to make this whole story up. David Rudolph did do quite a good job cross-examining her though. Candace got multiple details wrong, downplayed her obsession with Rae before the murder, and also lied about not being sexually involved with Rae while dating Shackelford. Candace didn't make it out of cross-examination unscathed, but there was no big breakdown like there had been for Watkins. The defense just had to hope that providing many smaller misrepresentations would undermine the trust the jury would have in the core of Candace's testimony. You can watch Candace's full testimony on the Court TV website if you are interested. By the way, this is actually the second part in a 4-part series. As you have hopefully noticed, quite a lot of work goes into creating these videos, so if you are enjoying the case, subscribe so you don't miss any future parts. Also, if you think other people would appreciate these videos too, then drop a like and a comment. That helps get this content in front of more eyes. Thank you. Candace actually wasn't the only person who claimed that Rae confessed to them. Officer Kevin Wallen was assigned to watch Rae at the hospital.
Mr. Carruth turned to me and said, "Are you guys going to take me out in handcuffs and put something over my head to hide my face when we go out?"
And what did you say?
I shook my head no and told him I didn't know what was going to happen.
What, if anything else, was said at that time?
At that time, he asked me if I followed the Carolina Panthers or was a football fan. Other people from the hospital were walking through and asking him questions. They asked him if there's anything he needed, if there's anything they could get him. And then after about 5 minutes, he asked me if there was any way for the police to determine if a gun had been fired from inside his truck. I told him that I wasn't sure what he meant. He asked me again if there was any way that we could test to see if a gun had been fired from inside his truck or from his truck. He said that he had seen on television that a gun blast would leave evidence inside a vehicle, and he wanted to know if we were able to test to find that out. I told him that our crime scene officers are the ones that do that, and I had no idea if they would be able to.
Anything else? What was said at that point? What happened?
Right after that, he asked me if the media was outside. I told him that when I arrived at the hospital, I didn't see anyone from the media. He asked me if the hospital was surrounded by police officers. And I told him that as far as I knew, we were the only police officers there.
Wallen obviously took these as confessions. For the defense to explain these statements, we need to know a little bit more about what happened at the hospital. After Rae received the page that Sharika had been shot, he quickly drove back to Hannibal Navies' house, which he had just left. Rae didn't know the directions to the hospital, so Hannibal and his girlfriend Tanya led the way. After briefly checking for Candace at the petrol station, they continued on to the hospital. When Rae arrived, Sharika's family was already there, and they were clearly under the impression that Rae had some information on what happened. That's a very reasonable assumption, since the last contact they had had with Sharika was her calling her cousin and asking him to clean up the apartment since she and Rae were currently driving over. But the family may have been a little bit too accusatory, and after they questioned him, Sharika's mother actually apologized to Rae. Anyway, according to Sharika's father, Rae was acting weird at the hospital, but Tanya and Hannibal said that his behavior was appropriate. Either way, some people can act strange in stressful situations, and acting strange doesn't mean that you are a murderer. At some point during the night, Rae discovered that the police had issued an all-points bulletin for him. They were looking for him and didn't know that he was at the hospital. When the police found out where he was, they stationed an officer to stay with him at all times. Now, take all of those facts and just briefly assume that Rae was actually innocent of these crimes. Is it reasonable for Rae to say the things that Officer Wallen described? Rae had no prior experience with the criminal justice system or police. When the officer was standing next to him, watching him, he probably thought he was already under arrest. How was Rae meant to know that an all-points bulletin was only related to him being questioned? He probably thought the bulletin was to find him and arrest him. Sharika's family clearly already thought he was guilty. The police probably thought he was involved too. We can also see where his concern is when he's talking to the officer. He asked if the police will cover his face when he is led out of the hospital and if there is already media outside. He was worried about his public image. If Rae were guilty, he would be worried about going to jail. But if he were innocent, he would know that the evidence would eventually point away from him. But his reputation would still be harmed from the initial perp walk. The question about gunpowder residue in cars also makes sense since Rae knew that no guns were fired from his vehicle. If he were innocent, then at this time he would know nothing about the police's theory related to him stopping and blocking Sharika's car while Watkins shot her from another vehicle. So it would be fair to assume that a gunshot residue test on his car would exonerate him. So, while Officer Wallen, without understanding the surrounding context, might have interpreted the statements as a confession, from a more informed view, they are at least consistent with both innocence or guilt. So actually, they are not the silver bullet that they first appeared to be. That was a quick accounting of Rae's time at the hospital after the shooting. But in terms of determining his involvement in the crime, it can actually be more useful to analyze his behavior before the shooting. So, what did Rae do on Monday, the 15th of November? In the morning, he went to training as usual. In the afternoon, he went to his teammate's house where some Panthers players had a Madden 99 tournament. It was after this, in the evening, that the prosecution asserts that Rae took the first steps towards organizing the hit that would take place just a few hours later. Apparently, Rae had just decided that the assassination plot had to happen that night, right then, or he had planned it beforehand, but only started working towards accessing the hoopty and the gun in the evening. After the Madden tournament, Rae went home and invited over Melvin Billingsley, the cable hacker. Watkins, Kennedy, and Stanley Abraham all briefly stopped at Rae's house and chilled with Melvin for a bit. Rae then went to the cinema with Sharika, where by sheer chance, Hannibal and Tanya Ferguson were seeing the same movie. And after that, the time was all accounted for previously. The defense called most of the people who interacted with Rae that day. Coaches from the Panthers, physios working on Rae's injury, the teammates Rae played Madden with, Melvin Billingsley, Tanya Ferguson, and Hannibal Navies, and they all testified that Rae was completely normal that day. He was his standard, chill, jokey self. If anything, the only thing different about him was that he won his Madden games. Is Rae Carruth really the kind of person who could laugh and joke with Sharika in the cinema, knowing that in an hour he was going to have her killed? Maybe, but it certainly doesn't fit with the character evidence that was introduced at the trial. Even taking away Rae's demeanor that day, and just looking at the day in chunks, is going to training and playing Madden more consistent with Rae planning a murder, or it just being a normal day? Is Rae inviting Melvin Billingsley over, where he would see Rae with his alleged co-conspirators, more consistent with a murder that would be headline news in the morning, or a drug deal that nobody was meant to find out about? Was taking Sharika to a public movie where they would be seen together, as opposed to just inviting her over to his house, more consistent with a murder plot, or Rae being blissfully unaware of the horrors that would soon transpire? All good points, but they do raise the question, if Rae is genuinely not guilty, then why did he run? After Sharika died, Rae and a lady friend of his, Wendy Cole, fled to Tennessee. The FBI were tipped off about them, and Agent Mark Post found Rae in the trunk of Wendy Cole's car. The condition Rae was found in clearly demonstrates his desperation to escape jail.
What, if anything, did you observe inside the trunk with the defendant Carruth?
Inside the trunk, as I was facing, once again, looking inside the trunk, I noticed 2 sports bottles, about 20 ounce in size, one on one side of the trunk lying halfway to its side, the other on the other side, laying on its side. Inside those 2 bottles was urine.
What else, if anything, did you observe inside the trunk of the car?
I noticed a number of candy wrappers, sports bar type wrappers laying and strewn about the trunk.
Did you observe a small bag inside the trunk?
Yes, it was a small dark cream color handbag, ladies type handbag inside the trunk to the right of his, as I was looking to the right of his legs.
Did you have occasion to subsequently look inside that bag?
Yes.
What was in it?
A large amount of U.S. currency.
How much?
$3,900.
Did you know that he had been in that trunk of the car at least since she had arrived in Wildersville that morning?
Yes, she told me that he'd been in the trunk for 24 hours.
As you can tell, Rae was clearly very motivated to escape without seeing the inside of a courtroom or a jail cell. The defense didn't actually dispute anything related to the flight. Rae was indeed trying to escape, but they claim that Rae didn't do it because he was guilty, he did it because he just needed time to think. A number of occurrences had led Rae to believe that the police were out to get him. For a while after the shooting, Sharika was in a coma but still alive. Rae had been arrested for assault and had bonded out of jail. Coincidentally, the same day that he paid the bond, another charge was brought against him, so the bond was cancelled. Rae didn't like jail, and he was held in solitary confinement for his own safety, but it was very cold there. Rae's then lawyer told him that the timing of the new charge was just a coincidence, and he convinced Rae to turn himself in. Rae bonded out again, and tragically, shortly thereafter, Sharika died. Rae was charged with murder, and the police were looking for him again. He was told that he would be held in jail for roughly a year before his trial. It's possible that Rae even thought that that full year would be spent in solitary confinement. He also told his paralegal, Leonard Kornberg, and his bail bondsman, Jimmy Lasko, that when Sharika died, his best defense had passed away. Rae hoped that Sharika would survive and wake up and tell the police that he had nothing to do with the crime. So, Rae ran away to have some time to think before he turned himself in. Honestly, that's not a great reason to run, but if that theory is possible, it would change the flight from being a tacit admission of guilt to just being a foolish mistake made by somebody under a lot of stress. Rae also claimed to be afraid that the police would shoot him if they found him. He thought that the police were after him and that they had convinced themselves that he was involved in the murder even before they arrived at the hospital in the early hours of November 16th. According to Rae's bail bondsman, at least some officers did treat this case abnormally.
When I got to the scene and got out and went to speak, go to Mr. Carruth's residence, the officers, the uniform officers, it was very intense. It was very charged. They instructed me that I was not to talk to, if I talked to Mr. Carruth, that I had to call them immediately. I was not able to bring him in, which is like a normal surrender type thing, and that they had to be contacted immediately, regardless. And this had never happened before to me since I've done this. It was just a normal surrender.
So, perhaps Rae was afraid for his safety, or maybe he was running to get some time to think. The fact still remains that Rae going on the run does not make him look innocent in any way. But this wasn't the only post-arrest action that Rae took that made him look guilty. Initially, Rae freely gave the police access to process his car since he knew there wasn't any incriminating evidence in it. The police did their investigation and found nothing, so they set up a time with Rae to return the vehicle. The police met with Rae, and while they were waiting for the crime scene technicians to return with Rae's Ford Expedition, the police asked him some questions about his phone records. Rae had no idea before that point that the police could access his phone logs. So, when Rae got his car back and left, he went to a car detailing shop. The manager of the shop, Dwight Perry, said that he saw Rae talking on his personal cell phone when he entered the establishment. Rae then asked to use the business phone while they cleaned his vehicle. He called Van Brett Watkins at the Villager Lodge and told him, "If you are dirty, you should clean up," i.e., if Watkins had any evidence, he should destroy it. Is it a coincidence that Rae used a business phone to call his co-conspirator after he found out that the police could access his phone logs? No, this is clearly Rae trying to destroy evidence through Watkins without leaving any trail. Except this call may have been more normal than it looked. Dwight Perry testified that Rae had used the office phone before and that it was not abnormal for customers to use it. Panther Service Center had a landline phone plan that made local calls free, so people would use it for local calls rather than being charged on their cell phones. Rae also initially planned to make the phone call in a crowded lobby before Dwight invited him to use the back office. It wouldn't make any sense for Rae to tell a co-conspirator to destroy evidence if other people could overhear him. Also, did Rae actually have his cell phone with him that day?
You were asked a question by Mr. Graham about whether Mr. Carruth had his cell phone with him at the time. Remember?
Exactly.
And I think you said something about to the best of your recollection or something like that, right?
I thought I said he did.
Okay. I think maybe what you said was to the best of your recollection, he was on his cell phone?
At some point, I think initially he was on the phone, yes.
Well, did they ever give you Mr. Carruth's cell phone records for that day to help you remember? I mean, this happened, what, a year ago now, right?
Over a year ago, sir.
Let me show you what's already been stipulated as admissible. A page from Mr. Carruth's cell phone records that was previously provided to the prosecution.
Yes, I do.
You see the first call that morning on Mr. Carruth's cell phone?
Yes.
And what time was that?
10:04 a.m.
10:04 a.m.?
Yes.
And you see the second call on his cell phone there?
Yes.
What time was that?
10:06 a.m.
And do you see the third call on his cell phone there?
Yes.
What time was that?
3 o'clock.
3 p.m. So does it appear to you that the records that the state had when they asked you that question would have indicated that, in fact, he was not on the phone, on his phone, between 10:06 a.m. and 3 p.m.?
I don't recall this any records. I don't recall being shown any records of phone calls.
Right. Exactly. Does that make it appear to you that he was not on his cell phone?
Yes, it does.
Did anyone show you this before they asked you those questions?
No.
Rae wasn't on his phone, and the prosecution should have known that. Also, the contents of the call which Watkins alleged is in no way inconsistent with the defense's drug theory. If you're dirty, clean up could easily be referring to the brick of weed that Rae knew still to be in Watkins's possession. The theory that Rae was trying to cover up anything related to the murder before being charged is just inconsistent with the facts. Rae let the police search his house and car without a warrant. He answered any questions the police had at the hospital before his lawyer told him not to say anything. Even when Rae picked up his car and the police probed him about his call records, something which is definitely a bit suspect considering the police knew that he had legal representation, Rae answered all the questions honestly. He told the police, right then and there, that the calls to the Villager Lodge were to Van Brett Watkins, and he even gave the police the room number. So it's pretty clear that Rae is actually a key figure in the police finding the shooter in this case. Watkins was pretty annoyed when he found out that Rae had given his address to the police. Why would Rae do that if he was in a murder conspiracy with Watkins? That doesn't make any sense. But it makes complete sense if Rae doesn't know that Watkins is actually guilty and he is just trying to help the police solve the murder of his ex-girlfriend and son. If Rae knew that Watkins, Kennedy, and Abraham killed Sharika, and Rae was going around covering up evidence, why would Rae not go to the chip hacker Melvin Billingsley and ask him not to tell the police that the co-conspirators were at the house that night? Melvin said that never happened. Rae wasn't covering anything up. Except the prosecution has one more exhibit, and this one is in writing.
It's a letter that Rae wrote to me from jail.
Talking about the defendant, Rae Carruth.
Yes. Also, about the police. Amber, I'm going to trial, and there's nothing anyone can say or do to prevent that. All the police are trying to do now is get evidence against me. Please understand that and promise me you won't talk to them. It won't help, it will only hurt, especially if you talk to them without an attorney, because they will lie to you and talk shit about me and all my women and twist what you say around. They'll also take what you say and use it against you in court. When my attorneys ask about my son in an interview or in court, here's what you recall.
So let's follow that.
The numbered list follows.
Okay.
Number 1, upset I missed him being born, and there's parentheses and says at football camp. Number 2, upset I missed first step, first words, ...
Did the defendant ever indicate to you either of those two statements about his son?
No.
Okay. I'll go ahead. Number 3.
Number 3, felt he was soft and needed me in his life. And then parentheses, he wouldn't even go to the bathroom by himself. Number 4, didn't mind paying child support. I was just upset that I was paying so much money, and my son lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with his mother and grandmother, and that he didn't have his own room and shared a bed with his mom.
Did he ever indicate to you that he did not mind paying child support?
No.
What did he indicate to you about child support?
That he thought he was paying too much. Number 5, felt like she wasted the money on stupid stuff like clothes and toys.
Did he ever indicate to you that Michelle Wright was wasting money on stupid stuff like clothes and toys?
He indicated to me that she was spending the money and buying stupid things, but never specified clothes and toys.
Okay. Number 6.
Number 6, wished I could spend time with him alone, but she would never let me take him.
Did he ever indicate to you that he wished he could spend time with him alone?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Number 7.
She was jealous and didn't want him around my girlfriends.
Didn't want who around his girlfriends?
The son.
Okay. Did he ever indicate to you anything about that?
He kind of, I guess, ties into number 6.
Mm-hmm.
He would complain to me that Michelle, and this was also why I couldn't meet her, that Michelle was always jealous because she wanted to be with him, that she didn't like me, didn't like that he was with me, and felt like she should be driving the Lexus, and didn't want him around, or the son around Rae's girlfriends, and that was the reason he always had to have her around. I guess, does that answer?
Continue on number 8.
Number 8, always had to take her with me when I went somewhere with him.
Continue.
9. Always had to take someone over her house with me because she would get.
I thought he was asking whether each one was the truth or not.
Well, I don't know whether it was or not, but it's his direct examination.
Go ahead.
Always had to take someone over her house with me because she would get in the way of me and my son's visit by trying to kiss on me and trying to get back with me.
Did he ever tell you any of those things?
He told me that he always took someone to his house with him because he didn't want to be around her.
Did he say anything about her trying to kiss on him?
He would say, he'd always told me, she's always trying to get back with me and just wants to talk about being together. Never said kiss on me, but.
Number 10.
While we were together in Colorado, she called and told you if you didn't let her man come home and take care of his responsibility, she was going to make it hard on me.
Did you ever have any conversation with Michelle Wright while the defendant was at the University of Colorado and you were there with him at that time?
No.
Number 11.
11. She told you that you needed to step aside and let me come and take care of my family.
Did you ever have any such conversation with Michelle Wright?
No.
Go ahead.
12. She would call and harass us all the time and say stuff like, if you don't come home for Thanksgiving, you'll never see your son again.
Did you ever have any such conversation with Michelle Wright?
Objections, that is us, not her.
Or did you ever party to any such conversation with Michelle Wright?
No.
Go ahead.
13. She was horrible, and I was upset and cried a lot about being so far away from him and her being able to tell me when I could or couldn't see my son.
Did that ever happen?
He never cried or complained about it, no.
Number 14.
14. Talked about suing her for custody, but I felt like it would be a waste of time because I was away at college and didn't know him that well.
Did he ever talk with you about suing Michelle Wright for custody?
No.
Go ahead.
15 has a star by it.
Yes, ma'am.
She and I never argued about money, just about me seeing my child without her around and moving into a bigger place so that he could have his own room and that she and I would never be together again. I love you, girl. Peace.
Do you know whether or not the defendant and Michelle Wright argued about support money?
According to him, what he would tell me that yes, they did.
That's pretty definitive. The only argument that the defense could put forward was that perhaps Rae was writing the letter and including his recollections of what they talked about. He wasn't asking Amber to lie for him. He was simply summarizing years of conversations they had had. It is the case that for every one of those claims, the defense had called at least one person who testified that Rae told them that fact. So maybe Rae just misattributed some of those conversations to happening between him and Amber. That explanation doesn't explain the wording of the letter, as it clearly sounds like Rae is asking Amber to lie for him. Also, David Rudolph mentioned in his objection to the letter being allowed in that the defense only found out about it the morning it was introduced. So honestly, if anything, the letter undermines the people who previously testified that the points in the letter were true. Maybe Rae had asked them to lie for him also. But believe it or not, this letter was not even the worst part of Amber's testimony for Rae.
When did you tell the defendant that you were pregnant?
In May of 98.
May of 98. Where were you when you told him that?
I was in Colorado and called him and attempted to tell him.
All right, tell the jury, if you would, just in your own words, what happened when you called the defendant about your pregnancy?
I called him late, about 2 o'clock, I think, Colorado time, and asked him if he was busy. And he was very rude to me and said yes. And he said, I'm out. And I just kind of sat there for, a couple seconds. And I said, well, do you have time to talk? And he said, I told you I was busy, and just hung up on me. So I called him back and he answered the phone. I said, Rae, and he hung up on me. And I called him again, and he had a friend answer the phone and said, well, Ray's outside talking to somebody. He said he'll call you back. And, I said, I can hear him, can I talk to him? And he said, well, he's busy, his friend was nice to me. He said he'd call me back. So then I just kept on calling and calling, and he had turned his phone off. So then I called his home phone, and I left him a message, and I cussed at him and said, I'm pregnant. And he called me back at 4 a.m. sometime and said, you better be joking.
I'm sorry. What did you say in the message that you left?
I just told him, F you, I was trying to talk to you. You didn't have any reason to hang up on me. I'm pregnant, and hung up.
Okay. And then when he called you back, I'm sorry, pick up. What did he say?
When he called me back, he said, you better be joking.
Yeah. Overall. Go ahead, man.
He said, you can't have no kids. I ain't having no more kids with somebody I'm not going to be with. And no, F this. You ain't.
All right.
I was very upset.
Now, did you have any further conversation with him at that time?
Not during that conversation, that phone call.
How did that conversation end?
He said he would call me back in the morning. It was late. He woke me up during sleep. Called me a few hours later in the morning after we both woke up.
And tell the ladies and gentlemen what that conversation was. Overall.
He called me and again expressed, I'm not having any kids with somebody I'm not going to be with, and I'm not going to be with you. I already told you I don't want kids with you, and told me don't make me make me send somebody out there to kill you. I'd do it, and basically, was upset with me, telling me, you can't have this baby.
Did you have any discussion with the defendant about abortion?
Yes.
And what was that?
He wanted me to have an abortion because he didn't want to have kids with somebody he wasn't going to be with.
Did you have an abortion?
Yes, I did end up.
Let me ask you about the visit the same visit during that 4 or 5 days that you were visiting the defendant at the Point Apartments in March of 1998. During that time that you were there, did you hear the defendant say anything about his son Rae and his son's mother, Michelle Wright?
Yes.
Overall.
Yes.
What did you hear him say about his son and Michelle Wright?
Rae was on the phone talking to somebody and got off the phone, and his cousin Tiffany at the time was also there and said to me, or both of us, y'all, would it be messed up if, I had somebody, well, he gave me two different scenarios. It was, would it be messed up if I had somebody, kill Michelle and my son, or just my son, so that, I wouldn't have to pay her any money, or if, even if she just like got in a car accident, or something happened to her, I could have my son and I wouldn't have to pay her any money. And Tiffany and I both said, Rae, that's messed up, and he left it alone.
Describe the manner that he discussed that subject with you and Tiffany. Objection. Overall.
It was jokingly. He always presents things kind of as a joke to see how people will react.
Objection to that. Overall, so that's tape.
He said it jokingly.
So, Rae had thought about killing his ex-girlfriend and son in Sacramento, and also threatened to kill Amber when she became pregnant. That is a 1-to-1 match of what he is accused of in this case. If believed, that destroys Rae's chances of being acquitted. Well, the defense can at least be thankful that it isn't in writing this time. Unlike the letter, there is no physical proof that this conversation happened the way that Amber described it. So, the defense needs to show that Amber is lying about these conversations. But why would Amber lie about Rae?
In early December, after you heard about the testimony about Mr. Carruth being engaged to Tanisha, you called Tanisha, didn't you?
I've called Tanisha all the time. That's who Rae has asked me to call. And I didn't hear that then. Rae wrote me a letter and told me he was going to marry her in May or June.
And you told Tanisha, did you not, that Rae really loved you and not her?
I got into an argument with her. It was a long argument. I mean, I didn't say he loved me, not her. I said something no, I didn't say that. Do you want me to explain?
Unless there's some answer other than yes or no.
No, I didn't tell her that.
Did you, after that, tell Mr. Carruth that if you couldn't have a relationship with him, no one was going to have a relationship?
No, I did not want Rae. I never have said that to him ever in my life. I've never said that to him.
Well, it was after that phone call with Tanisha that you made contact with Jeff Mooney, isn't it?
It was around the same time. I might have called Jeff before her. I don't know. I think it was after, but my decision had already been made to talk to prosecutors.
Amber is mad at Rae, so she is lying to get back at him. To be fair to Amber, she denies ever being obsessed with Rae. It was just a normal relationship. This is where we are really lucky that the trial was recorded. We can just watch the cross-examination and decide for ourselves if Amber Turner was a normal partner in a normal relationship. For context, this clip starts with Rudolph questioning Amber about the time just after she moved to Charlotte with Rae when she was just 18. So let's see if David Rudolph can successfully portray Amber as jealous.
At some point during those 4 months that you were here, you got jealous of Mr. Carruth, didn't you?
No.
Did you ever check up on the numbers on his pager to see who had paged him?
He didn't have a pager. He had a pager when I first met him, and then he had a pager after we broke up. So there was no, in that period of time you're talking about, no, he didn't have a pager.
Did you ever check the numbers on his pager?
Yes.
To see who had paged him?
Yes.
And did you ever listen to his messages to hear who had called him?
Yes.
And did you ever call people back from voicemail, where you have the caller ID, to see who had called them?
There was one person that I did call, yes.
And finally, in December, he broke up with you, didn't he?
No.
Well, he told you that he was going back to Colorado, and you went back to Colorado.
Right.
And he didn't end up taking you back with him, did he?
No.
As a matter of fact, he changed his cell phone numbers, changed his pager number.
Yep.
Didn't want to have any...
Actually, again, he got the cell phone and pager afterwards. He didn't change anything that I had already. He didn't
want to have any contact with him.
I guess he decided that.
But you weren't satisfied with that.
Well, no, because he had not told me we had broken up.
So you started, for example, calling Tiffany, trying to get numbers where you could reach Rae?
Yes.
Or Muhsin Muhammad's wife?
I might have called her. I don't remember that.
And it's fair to say that you were angry and hurt, right?
Of course.
And when you flew out to Charlotte in, was it March of '98?
Right.
That was your attempt to try to rekindle the relationship?
I wouldn't say that. Can I explain?
Sure.
That visit in March, Rae was still expressing to me that, like very shortly before that, we had broken up, or, and that was, he asked me to come out there because he was telling me he needed some time to live by himself. I still at this time thought I was moving back there. So I went to visit him thinking that whatever it was that had made him disappear, he was going to explain to me and things were going to be worked out. So it wasn't an attempt to get him back. It was thinking we were still supposed to be a couple. I mean.
even though he had changed his cell phone number?
He had gotten a cell phone number and not given it to me. And when he was he was in Sacramento, and when he went to Charlotte, we didn't have a phone connected there. So when he got a phone number, he'd know he didn't give it to me, and he got a cell phone, and I didn't have the number. It was nothing that was changed that I had. He just didn't give it to me. He disappeared.
And with that, you still thought you were a couple?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, can I explain that?
Yes, ma'am.
I thought that we were still a couple because for this whole, over a year that he and I were together, I always knew where he was. We were always together. Things were always good. He had never treated me bad or been mean. So suddenly when he decided, that he was going to break up with me, he just disappeared. And I was upset, wondering what was going on. So, yes, I did still think that because I figured something must be up that I didn't know about. And I wasn't just going to let it go. I mean, that was a drastic change. So, yeah, I still thought that.
And even after your visit in March, Mr. Carruth didn't want to start up the relationship again.
Not yet. He was still leading me on to believe we were together, and he wasn't carrying on any relationships, that he was waiting for me and just, or not waiting for me, but he was taking his time to figure out his life, I guess.
After you would get his phone numbers, he would have to change them again, right?
I wouldn't say he would have to change them. I guess if he did it on his own accord. I don't know why.
You remember tracking him down at a football camp that he was
I know what you're talking about. A football camp or the Colorado football camp? He called me when he came down. We had still, at the time, still thinking that something was supposed to get better between us. I still had all of our CD collection. I still had things at his house. I had things of his. So when he came down, he called me and said, I figure I should call you, before you get mad because I didn't tell you I was out here, and invited me to come see him, and then said, and bring my CDs. And then I went to him, and I think I know what you're talking about. Would you like me to explain so you don't have to ask the question? He and I, of course, I went and I gave him his CDs, and I thought, I don't want to hound him too much. I'm going to go home. I'm not going to spend the night. I'm not going to ask to stay there. He and I had sex. The next day I called him thinking, I'll call him and go to lunch. And he had checked out of the hotel. So I called another hotel and found him. I didn't track him down. I just called the hotel. And I would look for him doing that.
For example, you speak with Rebecca Mobley?
Yes, I've spoken to her.
You know who she is, right?
Yeah, she's a friend of mine.
Right. Did you ask her, for example, a couple of days ago about whether there was something about baby furniture?
Did I ask her
Court
that?
TV? Yeah. Did you have a conversation with her about baby furniture?
I may have.
What was your interest in-
I would actually, I don't want to talk about Rebecca. I've been asked not to by her, so.
Excuse me?
I would prefer not to talk about things that she has said. If she's not here,
I'm just asking you what you said to her.
What I said to her?
Yeah.
What did I say to Rebecca about baby furniture?
Yeah, did you ask her about baby furniture and the testimony about baby furniture?
We spoke about baby furniture. What do you? Question?
And did you tell her that you were angry that Rae had been going to the doctor's appointments with Sharika because he didn't go with you?
No.
No?
I never have said that to anybody.
Okay.
No.
Have you discussed testimony with Michelle Wright?
Excuse me? No, I never have said that ever because I never was upset about that. Rae did go to a doctor's appointment with me. I only had 2.
Have you discussed trial testimony with Michelle Wright?
Yes.
For what it's worth, Rae's friend, Doniel Willard, testified that Amber was clearly interested in Rae, even after the charges. Rae's cousin also testified that Amber was very protective of Rae and that she was jealous and disapproving of the cousinly friendship she and Rae had. Amber's cross-examination speaks for itself though. Well, even if Amber was annoyed and now hated Rae, is there any precedent of Amber either lying about or misremembering events to portray the people she hated in a worse light?
want to start with the way in which you saw Miss Merritt.
Okay.
The truth is that you sent me an email.
Mm-hmm. Saying that, because you asked me to contact you if the police had tried to contact me, so I was letting you know that they had.
Could I finish my question?
Sure.
Thank you. The truth is that you sent me an email on August the 10th of 2000 at 10:25 a.m.
Okay.
saying that you were giving me a heads up that you had gotten a call from a Charlotte police investigator.
Right.
And you asked the question, would it be better for me to talk with them or not talk with them?
Right.
And do you think I should hire a lawyer?
Right.
And you said you can reach me at my home basically any time.
Mm-hmm.
I understand you are out of the office, so no rush on calling me back.
Okay.
Is that how it started? Yes. And 5 days later, after that email, I called you back, didn't I?
I have the message on my phone still. I don't know the date, but I could check.
And what I told you was that I couldn't give you any advice.
Right. Still right.
Could you just let me finish my question, man? It's just
Okay.
a question for you, Patrick. What I told you was that I couldn't give you any advice about whether you should talk to the police or not talk to the police because I represented Mr. Carruth, right?
Yes, you did tell me that.
And that it would be improper for me to give you any advice about that, right?
You also said, obviously it would be better not to, but I can't give you, I'm not allowed to tell you one way or the other. If you'd like to, I will contact an attorney that's a friend of mine in Colorado and have her contact you. And that's what happened.
Are you done now?
Yes.
What I told you was that I could not give you any advice.
Right.
And that if you wanted to talk with an attorney, I could try to put you together with an attorney who understood criminal law and who could then speak to you.
And was a very good friend of yours. Yes.
Are you saying that I told you in this phone conversation that I said that Geraldine Merritt is a very good friend of mine?
Yes, you said that she, like you said, she knows law very well. She's a good friend of mine, and I will contact her. And she called me. I might have that on my machine also, where she called and said, Dave Rudolph asked me to call you, said you had some concerns.
Well, actually, what I said was, I thought it'd be better if you could talk to somebody independently and, they can explain, the situation to you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And her name is, let me look it up for a second. Hold on 1 minute. She's in Denver. Are you close by Denver?
Right. Okay.
And she writes columns on this kind of stuff. Remember that?
Yes, but I do recall, and maybe it wasn't that conversation. You did tell me, because I spoke to you about it. You said she was a good friend of yours.
The attorney's questions, if you feel the need that you need to explain your answer, you may do so.
Okay.
You keep going back to this one other thing. Don't joust with the attorney.
Okay.
You may answer the question. Then if you need to explain your answer in the context of the question asked, you may explain.
Okay.
And what I told you was that I would leave her a message so that you would not be calling out of the blue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I gave you her phone number.
And you gave her mine.
And then I said, after you talk with her, decide what you're going to do. And if you're going to talk with the police, let me know so that I could sit down and talk with you.
Yes.
Right? And what I told you was that whether you talk to the police or not was totally up to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the end of the conversation.
Yes, you told me those things.
And then the next contact you had with my office was that you were calling me and I wasn't available to take your calls, right? So
I don't remember when the next time was that I called.
Well, you spoke with my secretary several days after you had spoken with Miss Merritt. Isn't that right?
It's probably true.
And that's because you had called me and I hadn't returned your calls, right?
Might have been, yeah. I don't know.
Indeed, you told my secretary that you thought I was being very standoffish. Remember that?
I probably did say that. Oh, I do. I remember that conversation. To Vicky, is that Vicky?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I do.
I told Vicky that you thought I was being very standoffish. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't paying enough attention to your phone calls.
No, it wasn't that. It was the way that you were acting when I talked to you.
Right. Arm's length. Right?
Sure.
This was at the start of her cross-examination, by the way. She really gave 100% energy the whole time. Anyway, that's the motive and the tendency to lie. But the defense hasn't actually disproven any of Amber's story about falling pregnant and Rae threatening to kill her. The defense doesn't have a positive obligation to disprove anything, but in this case, it would be useful to have. If the defense could find a witness to contradict some aspects of Amber's account of falling pregnant and being threatened to have an abortion, that would be incredibly helpful in undermining Amber's story. Ideally, they would find a neutral witness who has no preference to Rae rather than Amber. Well, the defense didn't find any neutral witnesses. They found someone even better. They brought in somebody positively biased towards Amber. The defense called Amber Turner's own mother. Barbara Turner testified that she didn't know anything about Amber having an abortion, but she did know about a miscarriage that happened previously. Furthermore, it wasn't actually even Amber who informed Barbara about that pregnancy. It was Rae who let her know. Barbara also testified that Rae was good with children, wanted a child, and was non-violent. To be fair to Amber, she claimed that the abortion that she got because Rae threatened her was a separate pregnancy from the previous one that ended in miscarriage. So it is completely possible that Amber just never told her mother about it. But it is worth noting that when Amber testified on direct, she never mentioned the pregnancy which ended in miscarriage. And even if Amber is not believed at all, the letter from Rae telling her to lie to his lawyers is authentic, and it proves that Rae is trying to conceal evidence. But if you can bring in one of your biggest haters' mother to say nice things about you, it's a good day in court. Barbara Turner contributed to bolstering Rae's character and undermined his proposed motives for murder. Just looking at the motives the prosecution put forward, it is interesting that the three witnesses that claimed that Rae killed Sharika, that's Watkins, Kennedy, and Candace, all claimed that Rae told them why he did it, and they all attributed different motives to Rae. It's really up to you what to believe. Maybe you think that Rae did kill Sharika because of one of those three motives the prosecution laid out, or perhaps it was a combination of the three. Maybe you think he didn't have a motive, or at least the prosecution didn't prove it. Anyway, what did the jury think?
We, the jury, returned a unanimous verdict as follows: that the defendant, Rae Lamar Carruth, is guilty of discharging a firearm into occupied property, guilty of using an instrument with intent to destroy an unborn child, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder of Sharika Adams,